Praise the Lord, everyone. Professor Roop here. Thanks for joining us once again this week on Apostolic Church History Podcast, where we're going through Apostolic Church history from the Apostles all the way till today. That's 2,000 years. We got a long ways to go, guys. Long ways to go. Every Friday, 7 p.m., a new podcast comes out. And if you miss it, or missed the previous ones, they're all recorded and they're on my YouTube channel, Apostolic Church History, where you can watch all of them. And I hope they're a blessing to you. God bless you. So, we just kind of started chapter 12 of the book of Acts, which is one of my favorite stories. I guess they're all my favorite to a certain degree. It's a tremendous story where James is executed and Peter is thrown in prison, saved. So, if you didn't watch last episode or forgot last episode last week, I'll run through it real quick again. So, Peter's in town and it's the Passover season, and Herod is getting a lot of heat from the priests because this Jewish minority, just Jewish sect called the Way, and pretty soon it's going to be called Christianity or Christians, but another called the Way. They couldn't stop it when they killed Jesus. When they persecuted the apostles in Jerusalem, they still couldn't stop it. It spread to Samaria. Then it spread throughout all Israel. And in Damascus, Paul, one of the leading Pharisees who was trying to stamp out this Jewish sect called the Way, was converted himself. So he's converted himself on the way to Damascus. And of course, we went through that story. It's a tremendous story. And so they lose their number one warrior in fighting this Christian sect, the Way. And Paul's there in Jerusalem preaching. They threaten him with death, and so he escapes back to his hometown, Tarsus. And, then maybe things quieted down a little bit, but the Roman government started persecuting the Jews, so there was a time of peace. The church had some time of peace, 3-4 years maybe, where the Jews were persecuting, or the Jews were persecuting the Christians, or the Way, and then the Roman government started persecuting the Jews, which kept the Jews down, kept them from persecuting the Christians. That's because the Emperor Tiberius liked the gospel, liked what Jesus Christ preached, and he did not want to persecute those people because he liked them. He liked the gospel. When Claudius became emperor, the Jews rebelled in Alexandria, Egypt. So I'm giving you a little review here, what's going on. And the Greeks and the Romans and the Jews in Alexandria never really got along. About 1/3 of Alexandria, the population of Alexandria, was Jewish. About 1/3 was Greek. And the other third was a combination of Romans and Egyptians. And in that day, Alexandria was a very large, second largest city in the Roman Empire, but also a large college town. A lot of schools there, a lot of people teaching there. If you were a wealthy man in Greece, Or if you're a wealthy man in Rome, you wanted to send your kids to Alexandria because that's where the good schools were at. So, but there was always conflict. They keep saying diversity is our strength. Diversity is not our strength. Diversity divides. Diversity divides. It's not our strength. So there was conflict, always been conflict, but the Jews protested, they rioted because the Greeks were putting their Roman gods in their synagogues and things of that nature, and so they rioted. First, the Greeks kind of rioted against the Jews, the Greeks were always politically correct in those days. And so when the Jews rioted back, the Greeks and the Romans burned down most of the synagogues in Alexandria, killed a lot of Jews in Alexandria. Synagogues they didn't burn down, they put Greek gods in their synagogues. And Emperor Claudius was behind all that because he didn't like the Jews. So not only did he persecute the Jews in Alexandria, he persecuted the Jews throughout the empire, which gave the way, or the Christian church, Christian sect inside Judaism, a great deal of peace, gave a period of peace, 3 or 4 years, I guess. And that allowed the Christian faith, the message of the gospel, to spread very quickly. One of the areas that spread was Antioch in Syria. And a very large revival took place there. Christian evangelists from North Africa, throughout the Mediterranean area, converged on Antioch in Syria. Now there's an Antioch in Asia Minor, not that one, but the one in Syria, which was the 3rd largest city in the Roman Empire. It's a great trading city, as I said in past episodes. So it was a very large city, a very diverse city, because you had traders from India, China, Persia, bringing their goods to sell in Antioch to third-party folks who would then transport it throughout the Roman Empire. So it was a very diverse city. Certainly a city in which you want to spread the gospel, because then the gospel could easily spread around the world that way. So a very strategic city. And so a large revival broke out. And probably the timing was correct because Peter had converted the Gentiles. He had converted a Roman legionnaire and his family, Cornelius, and opened up the doors to the Gentiles. Now, if you remember in Matthew chapter 16, Jesus gives Peter the keys to the kingdom and says, "You're the rock of the church." And so Peter took the keys, opened up for the Jews at Acts 2:38, the Samaritans a year later, and then 8 years later to Cornelius, his family, opens up to the Gentiles. So now the church is opened up to the Gentiles. So not long after that, months, maybe a year at most, this big revival takes place in Antioch. A lot of the Jews there convert first, then the Gentiles, Greeks were told. And the Greeks started flooding into the church. But, Peter had opened up the keys to the kingdom to the Gentiles, so it was time. And so all these evangelists and Bible teachers and prophets started converging on Antioch, because that's where the revival was taking place. and a great number. They were overwhelmed. They were all overwhelmed. So many people were coming to the church, they were overwhelmed. So Barnabas, one of the elders of the church and one of the great teachers of the church, an apostle, goes to Tarsus, which wasn't very far away, and gets Paul. Say, hey, look, Paul, we need you. We got because Paul was a Pharisee. He was trained in the scriptures, the Torah. So a lot of Jews who were converting in Antioch, but a lot of Greeks as well. Now the Jews knew the Torah, they just didn't know where Jesus was in the Torah. That's easy enough. But the Greeks didn't know anything about the Torah. They didn't know anything about the Old Testament. Prophets and historical books and poetry. Before you could show them where Jesus was in the Old Testament, you first had to teach the Old Testament. So that was a much bigger undertaking because the Greeks just didn't know anything about the Old Testament. So that was a much bigger undertaking than just taking the Jews and showing them where Jesus was. So Paul, Barnabas, and a lot of others stayed in Antioch for a year teaching. And then Agabus, the great prophet of the day, there were many prophets back then. He was just one of them, but Luke records his prophecy. That's why we know him so well, or we know of him. Says there's going to be a great famine in the world. Pretty bold statement. You make that kind of statement, you better be right. So you better be right. And he was. The Roman historian Josephus records that there was a great famine soon afterwards throughout the Roman Empire. And so he was right. And so the Jews in Jerusalem, or the Christian Jews in Jerusalem, were suffering from this famine. And so they asked the new converts at Antioch for help. Or they asked the church leaders for help, and the church leaders said, hey, we need some help down here. So they collected money, and Paul and Silas, we'll hear more of them later on, was tagged with taking the money back to Jerusalem, which they did. So it was a great revival there. This caused problems with Herod, the so-called king of the Jews. This caused problems with Herod. Herod started hearing a bunch of noise from the priests in Jerusalem. The high priest and the Pharisees, Sadducees, they started laying in on Herod to do something about it. They weren't happy with the revival in Jerusalem, weren't happy with the revival in Samaria, but this revival in Antioch, where all these Gentiles are coming into the church, unsupervised, unapproved by the temple, they really started laying in on Herod to do something about this. This was unacceptable. He had to do something about this, which sets up the Herod's persecution in chapter 12 of the book of Acts, which is where we're at now. Last episode I touched on a little bit. So Herod, now there's 5 Herods in Scripture. There was 5 Herods in history at the time. Now, Herod Agrippa the First, or Herod the Great, he's the one that persecuted Jesus when he was born. he threatened. It's where the three wise men went and talked to the king, King Herod Agrippa the First, and he died around 4 B.C. My Roman historians, Josephus says he died at 4 B.C. So he persecuted when Jesus was born. Herod Antipas, he died in exile in Spain. He was around when Jesus was crucified. Then you had Herod Agrippa II, and he's the one that presided over Paul's trial in Acts chapter 25. So we'll talk about that later. So there's different Herods in Scripture. It's kind of hard to keep them all straight. So they're all called Herod. So so it was just a common name. Herod was a common name back in the day. Jesus was a common name back in the day. Saul was a common name. Barnabas was a common name back then too. A lot of common names back then. John was. I mean, it's just people reuse the same names, just like people today do. I mean, people today do the same thing. So, my name's William. There's like 20 million Williams in the world. So, I'm not the only one. So, I think there's 3 Bills in our church, just in our church, our one church. So, it's not that big of a church. So Herod wants to persecute people of the way, or this Christian sect called the Way. Now, after Antioch revival, which I call the Azusa Street of the first century, people start calling Christians after that. So technically, it's Christians. They're Christians now. So we'll call them Christians from now on. So Herod says, well, the best thing to do to stop any kind of movement is to chop the head off the movement. That's to kill the leaders. Well, back then, at that time, the Apostle James was a leader of the church. So they arrest James. This is the time of this is just before Passover. Just before Passover. All these Jewish pilgrims are coming into the city. The city's filling up with pilgrims. It's busy. They're getting ready for Passover. But just before Passover, they catch James, the Apostle James. They throw him off the temple roof, thinking that's going to kill him. Because Jesus was tempted by the devil. The devil says, even if you jump off the temple roof, your angels will come protect you. Of course, Jesus rebuked him, and that's probably why they threw him off the temple roof. So they throw Apostle James off the temple roof, but when he hits the ground, he's injured. Probably mortally, but he's not dead yet. So they take a sword and they run him through with a sword. And that's why Scripture says they ran through with a sword. It's really they ran him through the sword. That's what killed him, technically. He probably was mortally wounded, falling from the temple, or being thrown from the temple. And so they kill James, and then they're looking for Peter, and they arrest Peter, but it's just before Passover. So they don't want to kill Peter during Passover. That looks bad. Just it spoils the whole festival. So executing these people. So they managed to kill James before Passover, but now Passover starting, and Herod, I'm sure the priests were in Herod's ears saying, look, it's the Passover, got all these pilgrims coming in. Let's wait for Peter. Just put him in jail. We'll kill him afterwards. Nothing like celebrating a great religious holiday and planning an execution of people at the same time. Funny how that kind of works. I remember in the Old Testament where God says, thou shalt not kill. Well, I remember that commandment. It's one of the big 10, actually. It's one of the big 10. Thou shalt not kill. Well, apparently to the priests, thou shalt not kill doesn't necessarily apply to them and when they want to kill somebody. I guess that applies only to the little people, So apparently so. This commandment's going to be broken, millions of times for the next 2,000 years, and I'm going to continue to bring it up. So they killed James, then they arrest Peter. They throw Peter in a dungeon, the jail, the city jail, the city lockup. They didn't have prisons back in those days because that was expensive, the warehouse people. Then the Romans were far more practical. If you were charged with a misdemeanor and convicted, you were sold into slavery. Simple enough. Half the population of the Roman Empire in that day were slaves. So slavery was a major institution. Had been since the dawn of time, since the caveman days. And so they would just sell you into slavery if you're a violent criminal. Well, in the early days of Rome, they just executed you. They just killed you. Got rid of you. As Stalin said, no people, no problem. Get rid of your problems by getting rid of the people. So that's what the Romans did. And over time, the Roman Empire liberalized, and then they had all these gladiator arenas where the gladiators would fight each other. And so they would give them a choice, immediate execution or you become a gladiator. I know I'm mispronouncing gladiator wrong. I know it. You can still chew me out in the comment section. It's all right. There's a lot of words I just can't pronounce right. So it's what makes me special. So anyway, so if you're a violent criminal, they would say, okay, 5 years you can fight in the gladiator arena, and if you survive, well, you do it for 3 years. Then the second 2 years, the last 2 years, you would train other ones to fight. And if you survived, then you would get your liberty again. They set you free. So I guess if you're convicted of a violent criminal, that was kind of a no-brainer. It would buy you a few more weeks or months. Most people didn't survive 3 years in the arenas because you fought other people fighting for their lives and they fought well. So you generally didn't survive. Most people didn't survive. But anyway, religious leaders like Jesus were executed immediately. So Peter, they're saving Peter till after Passover. Now, let me go on a little rant here. It's Passover, but the King James calls it Easter, which is a misinterpretation. They should, instead of Easter, they should have did Passover. But Easter comes from the heathen god Ishtar, the Mediterranean god, or the Mesopotamian god Ishtar. Ishtar was the god of love, sex, and fertility. That's who he is. And it was translated in English language as Easter. From Ishtar to Easter. And that's why we celebrate, or you, heathen apostolics, celebrate Easter with bunnies and egg hunts and dressing up. That's Ishtar worshipers do. And it makes me puke that apostolics want to celebrate Easter egg hunts and celebrate Easter. You're just celebrating a heathen god. You're celebrating idolatry, and you're bringing your idolatry into your church. Shame on you. Shame on you for doing that. Makes me sick that apostolics want to celebrate Easter. According to letters of Jerome, the great writer, Polycarp, the great apostolic, a true apostolic, not like apostolics of today. He was a disciple of the Apostle John, so he knew what he's talking about. He went to Rome in 147 A.D. to plead with the church, was fast become the Catholic Church, to not bring Ishtar worship into the church. Well, the Romans didn't like Polycarp because he was a great Christian leader. And the church of the day, the Catholic Church of the day, didn't like him because he was an apostolic. And he was preaching the apostolic message. So they both got together and they burned Polycarp at the stake. You know, apostolics burn me at the stake too. The church, or I wouldn't say apostolics, but some apostolics, but mostly Catholic Church or Catholic type churches, which are mainline churches. They don't burn me at the stake, but they'll burn me with their tongues at the stake. I've been kicked out of more than one church for trying to correct people. They want to bring idolatry into church. You know, God will judge you for that. How does he judge you for that? Read the book of Ezekiel, chapter 10, 11. You'll find out. You know, God gives you his spirit. He could take his spirit from you, too. He could take his spirit from your church. Apostolic churches back in the day had godly manifestations every service. Every service. Today it's rare in apostolic churches. We're becoming a mainline church, a church. We're becoming a cold mainline church. We're still hanging on. Once in a while, God will move on our church body, but it's getting rarer and rarer because we're bringing the world into the church. We're bringing the worship of Ishtar, Easter, into the church. It's an idol. Bunnies don't lay eggs. Bunnies don't lay eggs. Why do we celebrate Easter with bunnies and eggs, Easter egg hunts? Both of those are symbols of fertility of Ishtar. Symbols of fertility. Bunnies don't lay eggs. Come on. Come on, apostolics. Pull your head out of you know what. It doesn't make sense. It should make sense. Why do you continue to do it? Bunnies don't lay eggs. So, gosh. It's not Easter, it's Passover. Okay? Jesus died during Passover. He didn't die during Easter. Easter and Passover seldom coincide together. So that's my rant on Easter. So that's my rant on Easter. I'll bring it back up next Easter, this coming Easter. Thank you, and God bless you. See you next week. Remember, don't give up on religion until you've tried Pentecost. Thank you.